found AHO Radio. We're authentic human outliers coming together to help heal the fear of being authentic. To bring back genuine human conversation. No hype, no sensationalism, just honest talk about the critical issues affecting society, affecting humankind. And now, here are the hosts of AHO Radio, John Krotec and Bill Protzmann. Hey, good morning, John. How are things out there on the west coast of Florida?
We're doing great here. The sun is out. It rained a little bit last night, and just excited to be here with today's guest. How is it out in California?
Yeah, foggy this morning, and the Marines haven't started flying yet. If they were, we'd be hearing them. We had, I don't know, yesterday must have been a big day because there were like flights consistently leaving Miramar headed out to sea. I don't know where they're headed. They're headed someplace.
Nothing like good training, we have to have those pilots ready to go. But
the sound of power.
Super excited with today's guest. Colonel and I have been trying to link up for a while, and then we kind of lost track. But so excited to have him here today.
Oh my gosh, I am thrilled too. It's been a long time since I got to actually stand next to David Sutherland and shake his hand and say thank you, because that was, I don't know, it was years ago. David was still working for a big organization that we all know, but it's one of these things. AHO Radio is all about getting to the authentic stuff that's sort of under the hood of what the guests do, and the guests are all remarkable in this way that there's something deep inside the core that makes them all want to do what they do. And come to the table with just amazing stuff. And it's really cool because behind the scenes, behind all the the limelights and all the big names that you hear out there, there are people who are just doing what they do in a powerful, quiet, consistent way. And Colonel David Sutherland is one of those people. So I don't want to do the big reveal on all that, but I'd like to welcome David this morning as a very substantial individual with a huge influence that has happened to change the way that we do things in a certain sector of the world. I'm being very nebulous here on purpose, David, so we'll get to that in a bit. But this morning I'd like to welcome you, sir, as a father and a leader and someone who's had that kind of consistent influence in our world in a very powerful way. So David Sutherland, good morning. Welcome to AHO Radio.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Oh my gosh. So we were talking beforehand, and it turns out that all of us have sons. And one of the things that's so remarkable as a father is being able to have some kind of an influence, you hope, in a good way on your son. And let's begin there, because David, I want to know, when did you first know that your life would be one of service? How did that happen?
It's like God's fingerprints were all over it. I was led in a direction of making mistakes and learning from the mistakes. And so when I was in college at Bowling Green State University, I felt like I didn't fit in. I felt like I didn't belong. And the power of humiliation when you feel like you don't belong someplace is overwhelming. And it actually came from that guidance, that direction, that purpose came from my father. And as I went to him one day and said, I'm thinking of dropping out of college, I just don't know why I'm here. He said, before you do that, go by and check out the ROTC program at Bowling Green State University. He said, if you want to drop out, and I told him I was going to join the Army. And he said, before you do that, go and check out the ROTC program. And I did. And I walked into the detachment at Bowling Green the next day, and it was like God's fingerprints were all over it. I felt like I fit in. I felt like I belonged. And the next time I felt that way was when I reported to Fort Benning, Georgia, after being commissioned a second lieutenant at Bowling Green State University and reported into Benning as an infantry officer. And I just felt like I belonged in some sort of service capacity. And fortunately for me, it was 30 years of a life-calling career that led me to that. And then, that's just ingrained in you, and that at a certain point, that desire to serve. And I think we're all who have served in the military and have experienced that selfless service are wired to serve.
Appreciate your candor, sir. One thing that you point out, that we're all aware of is, life is a series of decisions that we make. And the beautiful thing about America is we have the opportunity to choose. And it's amazing how those influencers, like your dad telling you that little thing, how it directed you on a course that many of us who have served do understand the commitment to something much larger than ourselves. And you couldn't have said it more eloquently, that those types of people tend to find a place to fit in. And service to the community and to the nation, millions of people who don't even really know those who serve, need to hear that kind of story, that it does take a special person, not that we're better, but a special person who understands the commitment and the selfless sacrifice that those who wear the uniform, including law enforcement.
Yeah, my views on leadership evolved over 30 years of watching young men and women go places most people can't even imagine, and doing things that people can't even fathom. They're brave, they're resilient, they're courageous, and they're kind. But when we define leadership, which the Army defines as a process of influencing people by providing purpose, direction, and motivation in order to accomplish the mission and improve the organization, those are the two outcomes that leadership does. It's improve the organization and accomplish the mission. And so you have to be clear on what the mission is, what the goals of the organization are, and then you can provide that purpose, direction, and motivation. We talk about authentic leadership. And authentic leadership has certain traits and certain characteristics. But once you're influenced by others, for me, my father, and provided that purpose, direction, and motivation, things become much more empowering. And empowerment begins with knowledge, which goes beyond job training. It's why are we here? What are we doing? What's important about what we're doing? And then have those core values that you live up to, not only your family, but the core values of the organization and what you want the organization to be.
David, these sound like human principles to me, and I'm saying that because the context of this show, if anybody's watching this years from now, is June 2020. And the divisiveness that is in America right now is huge on all kinds of issues. But we know the fundamentals, the core issues, the things that make human beings go haven't changed. And they don't change because you happen to identify with one political party or another. They don't change because of your gender. They don't change because of your skin color. These are fundamental human values. And we have so many incredible examples of leadership. John and I were talking about Malcolm X and the example that he set back in the 50s and 60s. How is it that today we can surface those core values and connect them with authentic leaders who can take us from this crazy place that we're in right now to wherever it is that we need to go? And we need to go there, by the way, folks. We have to do this. That's why this is all coming up. We're in this mess because we have an opportunity to walk through it. So, David, how does one do that? How does one create that groundswell of effective, authentic leadership?
Yeah, we have never had a shortage of naysayers and pessimists. There are always those that will stand in the back of the crowd, point to the half-empty glass, and exclaim why great things can't happen. I've experienced firsthand the effects on esprit de corps and morale when leadership fails, managers take over, and followers hunker down and wait for better days. A fortress mentality kicks in. And we have to reject that paradigm of negativity. What we do is instead of focusing on the negative, focus on the positive, step out with people that have shared values, step out, unshackle innovation, and make good things happen. Because you protest is not a bad thing. But what we see is when the actions of a few, whatever side of the actions are on, the actions of a few don't live up to the collective values of the organization and the impact that it has on it. We talk about the values of an organization, a values-based organization where you set the tone, you set the culture, you measure the culture and reward the culture. And that's where we have to calibrate. We set the tone, we set the culture, and let's define culture. It's the way we think, the way we act, and the way we interact with each other. Yeah. And that has an impact. Sorry.
No worries.
That has an impact. The culture. So I worked with a lot of great leaders in my 30 years. I worked with a lot of very, very smart individuals, and I worked with a lot of great team builders. But I really only worked with two that were very, very smart and great team builders. Admiral Mike Mullen, the 17th chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and General David Petraeus, who was the multinational force commander in Iraq when I served over there. And what their abilities to do and to engage, even though they were working with multiple different cultures, whether it was the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, or it was cultural, political groups, sects being Shia, Sunni, Kurd, etc. But they had the ability to understand and recognize the way different organizations thought, acted, and interacted with internally and with each other. And then they were able to adapt that because they accepted what other people were thinking, and they were able to have open, honest, candid conversations with them, because at the end of the day, what they had to do was prioritize, delegate, and communicate within the values base of that organization and the behaviors that were taking place. When we shut down the communications and the priorities and don't recognize those, that's when the naysayers and pessimists come out, and they feel humiliated. And it goes back to what I talked about. So having that vision for the future, recognizing as a leader, it's about service for others. The conviction of your values linked to their values, and then creating genuine relationships with an understanding of a foundation of self-awareness. Those are the traits of authenticity, that foundation for self-awareness. We all have to step back and going, what am I doing to step up and participate?
I'm gonna follow up with that. Let me follow up with that. And I'll give you from a grassroots, private, boots on the ground soldier viewpoint of that. Okay. I'm a non-combat military veteran. I haven't seen any of that, but I trained quite a bit for it. We had great leaders, but even in training, when we had something that we had to accomplish and it came to be very challenging, I didn't look to the left and say to my buddy, you're black or you're white, or what's your political persuasion, or what's your gender orientation. We didn't have time for that because our leadership was clear and concise in what the mission and purpose was. And I think your question, Bill, would be, how do we get to that point? And the Colonel explained it very eloquently. When the mission is delegated in a clear and concise way, and the people boots to the ground level buy into it. They believe in it with all of their heart. And then all the negative things that we see so much of gets, I guess, diminished somewhat. And I think that supports, of course, David's looking at it from a command, and I'm trying to look at it from the private. And somewhere in the middle, you find that common ground. And I think that it's important to understand that for people that are the followers.
That's doesn't matter your rank in the military. It's the intersection of values and behaviors. The intersection of values and behaviors in the Army. You and I both understand the values of the United States Army are loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. That's ingrained in everyone from private to general officer. And it's ingrained in you from the day you come in. But it wasn't always that way. You served from 86 to 89, right?
In the active duty, then a few years in the reserves after that.
Right. And I came in, and my commission was in 1982, and I came on active duty in 1983. Remember, at that time, we were just becoming a values-based institution. Prior to that, in the 70s, and even prior to that, we focused on the mission, but there wasn't a shared value or values in the organization. So it was a draft. People didn't want to be there. Then we rebuilt in the early 80s. We started to rebuild in the early 80s. But really what took us from a Gallup poll done in the 70s that recognized the military as one of the least respected institutions in America to where we are today. For the past almost 30 years, the military's been regarded as the most respected institution in America, is because of the values that we have to live up to. DUIs, violations of Uniform Code of Military Justice and regulations are no longer tolerated. But when you and I were in, that was just as we were stopping the guys blowing off formation, guys accepting that someone was going to get a DUI, coming up hot for using smoking
marijuana. Yeah.
Now that's not tolerated, not because it's against regulations, but it's against the values of the organization. So you're impacted, your behavior that you're held accountable to goes back to that conviction of values. As a leader on the battlefield or in garrison, I had the same values as every other leader, because those were defined by the United States Army. And from the day we came in, from our initial training till we left, that's what we lived up to. Our behaviors had to intersect with those values.
You've said this a couple of times. I've heard a couple stories, but can you give us a story from, like, not combat perspective, but from the perspective of having to be in an area where your influence is required in order to keep the peace, of helping to cross the racial or religious boundaries that the Army had to face in a quite foreign environment, and how you brought values into connection with that opportunity?
Let me start with the idea of diversity and inclusion. Which
Perfect.
wasn't necessarily on racial lines, but rather backgrounds and thoughts. As a new soldier coming into the United States Army, you may be from Louisiana and your roommate is from the Bronx of New York. All right, you learn very quickly because of the values, because of the shared experience of basic and advanced individual training, et cetera, on how to live in that environment and how to embrace the different ideas and thoughts of those individuals. In 1988, I took command of my first company, 120 men in Schaffenburg, Germany, in Alpha 17 Infantry, 1st Battalion, 7th Infantry, Cotton Balers. And a few weeks into command, my first sergeant and I, First Sergeant David Ortiz and I, were looking at the unit manning roster. He had it up on the wall, and it had everyone by platoon. That was how we were organized. And what we realized, and it was kind of out of the blue, where Ortiz looked at me and said, "You realize that everyone in 1st platoon is black? And everyone in 2nd platoon is white, and everyone in 3rd platoon is Hispanic." And this was just after taking command, and it never clicked because all I saw were soldiers. That's all I recognized. So John, you're talking about the NCO, the keepers of the standards, which is what you have to have in any organization, are those individuals that keep the standards. And Ortiz intuitively realized that our diversity of thought, of background, of experience was non-existent because we'd set up, where people with similar backgrounds were in the same platoon. And so we reorganized the entire company to create more diversity and inclusion for different thoughts, different engagements, different cultures, different backgrounds, the way we think, the way we act, and the way we interact with each other. And that took our company from one that had significant discipline problems to all of a sudden one that had great confidence in each other, significant competence, and the discipline improved because we were able to share different viewpoints and different ideas. I think the traits of a leader, not just an authentic leader, but the traits of a leader come down to a couple different things. One is character, another one is knowledge, another one is pressure, and the last one is motivation. Leadership is what we do. Character is who we are. Following through on an obligation, even when the initial motivation is gone. Leadership is what we do. Knowledge is what we impart on each other and those around us. Pressure is what we endure. Doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. Leading by example, that's pressure. Brave leaders go to uncomfortable places. And lastly is motivation. It's what we inspire others to achieve their capacity for greatness. So that's a real world story in garrison. In the field, I commanded the coalition forces in Diyala province during surge operations in Iraq, the volatile Diyala province. Diyala was a bellwether of tribes, of industry, of agriculture. It was a labyrinth of different things. I had Sunni resurgence, Shia domination, Iranian influence, Kurdish expansion, and Al-Qaeda, all in this one area just on the border of Iran and northeast of Baghdad. And I had 25 major tribes, 100 sub-tribes, and 17 paramount sheikhs that could trace their ancestry back to the Ottoman Empire. That's a lot of egos in one room. And what I realized was it wasn't going to be a quick fix because we had to recognize and understand on a broad level what were their concerns. On a smaller level, who were those leaders, those charismatic individuals that could really help influence others, that were charismatic because they were concerned about the province, their families, their neighbors, their tribes, but on a bigger level, everybody, as opposed to personal or financial gain. And that came from a lot of engagements. It came from a lot of genuine relationships that had to be developed.
Was this throughout the
And
company or at the leadership level or?
this was the brigade level. When I commanded a brigade, about 5,000 troops in the province. And the province was the size of Rhode Island. Now it was at every level, from platoon, from private on up to me. We had to develop genuine relationships with the people that wanted to make positive difference in the country. So we had to train, we had to educate, we had to empower them, the service members, with knowledge of what we were accomplishing, how we were accomplishing it, why it was important to accomplish what we were trying to do, and that we couldn't kill our way out of the situation. We had to work with the people of Diyala and try to make it better, but there were bad people. Like I said, it was a labyrinth. And so the challenges we faced was we didn't want to create non-thinking robots. That knowledge that we imparted on our service members and on the people of Diyala was empowerment of what the future could look like. And we had to listen to them. We had to realize we had two ears and one mouth for a reason. So shut up and listen to what their concerns were, because we were going to leave. And it's the same thing here that we see today. We've got to have what you and I were talking about earlier, that duty to intervene. If we see something wrong, we've got to step in. It's our values. And if we see others acting inappropriately, we have to intervene and engage, because collectively, the values that we live, our behaviors impact that.
Thank you for being candid, with the platoon example or the company example and the brigade example. Three things stick out to me in your approach that I think is important to mention. Grassroots, understanding that it's a process, and then adding the humanistic approach into that process.
You mean values when you say humanistic?
Human to human, obviously values, but probably the biggest word is the process, that it is a process, and sometimes it can be arduous, but we mentioned steadfast and loyal, what I learned when I was in the service, and that steadfastness and loyalty to the overall mission is how we were able to have great success. And it's funny that you mentioned Latins, blacks, and whites, because two of my favorite friends when I was in the service was a guy from Brooklyn, a black kid that was just crazier than all get out. I didn't grow up in the inner city. And the other one was Figueroa, who was a Puerto Rican kid who grew up in the Bronx that you mentioned. And we were like the Three Stooges, but when it came time to soldier, we knew what we needed to do. And again, it comes back around to the leadership of the company that I was in. But looking at your approach and what I've looked at your resume and see what you've done at the Dixon Center and your consulting service, you seem to have taken all of those lessons from the service, because you're a field grade officer, and you've managed to bring those into the transition and veteran benefit world. And tell us a little bit about that, how you've been able, sir, to transition those things that you learned as a field grade officer in the U.S. Army to being now in the role at the Dixon Center and also with your consulting firm.
I went from one life calling career to another. I wasn't just looking for a post service job when I left the military. I was looking to work with people I trusted, admired, and respected. And I saw, as I was transitioning out of the military, that there was a desire across the United States, across the country. It's in our DNA to want to assist transitioning service members veterans of all generations, military families, and families of the fallen. What Admiral Mullen coined the phrase, the sea of goodwill. There is this desire, it's in our DNA to want to assist. The American people just aren't necessarily sure how. I had people coming up to me saying, tell me what I can do. How can I assist? And it really came about this idea, this concept of a couple different companies of how do we leverage and harness what exists inside communities already that can provide direct services through employment, education, and well-being to our veterans and military families. They're amazing young people. You just got to get them started and they're going to thrive. But they come home to an epidemic of disconnection. So I decided as I was transitioning out to start an organization that could be that conduit with community-based organizations that already exist, not to create new programs, but to take what exists inside communities and get them to include veterans and their families. So that was the concept behind the Center for Military and Veteran Services, which we refer to formally as Dixon Center for Military and Veteran Services. A nonprofit, not a standalone, it's part of the FedCap group, which is an international nonprofit organization. I didn't know anything about running or starting a nonprofit. So instead of creating a new one, I did what I was saying. Go to an existing organization and getting them to help me create this program, this center of excellence that can be that conduit for advice, resource sharing, consultation, leadership, and building direct service programs within what already exists inside communities. So whether it's a college, whether it's a nonprofit, an employer that wants to employ veterans but just can't find them, doesn't know their values, doesn't know their culture, doesn't know where they are, we help them. And to date, we've helped about 30,000 different organizations and individuals find and focus on veterans in housing, affordable housing, employment to address underemployment, well-being, and access to capital for veteran entrepreneurs by creating a national network of community-based organizations. That was the Center of Excellence. That feeds my soul. Dixon Center feeds my soul. Sutherland Partnership feeds my family.
That's outstanding, really.
That's the consulting organization. We work with major corporations on building ethical leadership and a culture that is grounded in, that bubbles up. That is the culture. It isn't just a CEO that comes in and says, here's our values and puts a plaque on the wall, but rather we help them set the tone, set the culture, measure it, and then reward it by addressing things, removing bureaucracy, addressing challenges with cost cutting, addressing the impact on esprit de corps and morale when the employees of the organization feel like they don't fit in. So that's Sutherland Partnership. But it's all based on the simple premise of people, we believe people should succeed where they work, live, and play.
Is there
That's
a way to
outstanding.
roll that into a wider mission? Let's use the word. Who knows what that mission is right now, but sort of to fix America in the broadest possible sense?
Well, I think that first off, America is not broken. I think there is a desire to right now want certainty. And what we have to recognize is with this amazing republic, the best we're ever going to get is clarity. And the clarity for me are certain values that I believe in when it comes to community success. And that is that the solutions are local. We have to stop looking at solutions, in my opinion, coming out of the national level and look at our families, our neighbors, and our community. Because in the military, you fought for your family, your neighbor, your community, and your buddies on your left and your right. You come home to your family, your neighbor, your community, and you look for new buddies on your left and your right. And we have to be accepting, like we experienced in the military, of those different backgrounds, experiences, and then make the positive impact locally. There are things that have to change at the national level, but you get one vote, go use it.
I completely understand that, and I appreciate your love for this country, because you're right. It starts at the local level, and then leadership branches out from there, and you can influence a lot of people if you have those core value sets in place. You know, you mentioned culture, and I was really intrigued. United States infantry officer authoring a book called The Bedouin Boy Poet King, A Profoundly Simple Journey. Tell us a little bit about that, because, you know, I have a great love for poetry myself, and I'm interested in what's going on in your mind, sir, with that. What was that all about?
Great question. So the idea actually came about when I was having a conversation with my youngest son. And he said, I don't know what I want to do. He graduated from East Carolina University. He moved to Park City, Utah, and was a ski instructor in Park City, Utah. And he called me up and said, Dad, I don't know what I want to do. And he said, I keep going for interviews and they say, what do you want to do? And I don't know how to answer it. And he was putting a lot of pressure on himself. And what we realized, or I started thinking of, was the governing words of the universe are be and do. Who we are and what we do. When you're a kid in high school, or even before high school, when you're a young person, you get asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? When you graduate from high school or college, people ask you, what do you want to do? What are you going to do? And we get these mixed up, and no one says, what do you want to be anymore? And I said to my son that, you know, who we are and what we do, work doesn't define you. It gives you the resources to have the life you want. But be and do unto others. Be the person that others trust, admire, and respect. And this started to evolve in my mind into the whole concept of a journey of self-discovery and leadership that we all want. And if you're struggling in life where you want to go, it comes back to who we are and what we do, which is be and do. I couldn't call it the book Doobie, so I changed it to Be Do, which is, from my experience in the Middle East, the abbreviation for Bedouin, Bedu, B-E-D-U. And so I took the concept of be and do, who we are, what we do, and turned it into a book about a young Bedouin boy who goes through an experience in life, his journey of self-discovery, by following 7 stars. And as he sees these signs, he seizes on them to how he treats and interacts with others, and what his goals in life are, and recognizing those signs and taking advantage of them to achieve his personal goals.
It's an
That's
amazing book, by the
fantastic.
way.
Yeah.
Great book. I read a lot of books like The Alchemist and Four Agreements and stuff like that. So when I read the book, David, it came to me like a parable for how to be and how to do in a successful way.
Yeah, I didn't have and it really just came down to a conglomeration of different individuals that Paul McKellips, my co-author, and I experienced in our lives over years in the military and serving together in Iraq. And but it goes back to that idea of the way we act, the way we interact, and the way we think collectively and not as individuals. You inspire or you inform in good ways or bad ways. And that's what B do as he was moving through life took on. But there were people that came to me and said, we didn't expect you to write this sort of book. And my dad had been asking me to do a book on leadership for a while. And I kept coming up with these self-help books. And that's not what I wanted. So we're starting our next version, and it's going to be about behaviors.
Sweet.
You can't get any more authentic than that. I mean, the personal, that's actually pretty genius, actually. And I like that. And I'm going to have to buy a copy, or maybe I'll get Bill's, but no, I want one of my own.
No, you can't.
You're right up the road in Tampa, aren't you?
No, I'm in just outside of Washington, D.C.
Okay. I know we're going to have to link up sometime, because I got to get the signature on.
I'm a huge fan of George Washington's. I've been fascinated with how George Washington was able to accomplish everything he did during the Revolutionary War without the technology that we have today. I'm also fascinated in how Mount Vernon wasn't destroyed by the British, as bad as they were to the colonies and the colonists, how his house, even though everyone knew where it was, wasn't destroyed.
Why do you think they did that? Why do you think they didn't do that?
There's one story about that just by happenstance, a British patrol was moving down the Potomac River, and George Washington's nephew paid them off to not destroy the town or the house, but they didn't realize it was George Washington's. They do a compare and contrast, which is interesting. You've got George Washington House, Mount Vernon, one of the largest landowners in Virginia, whose house was not destroyed. His beloved Mount Vernon. And then fast forward to the Civil War, and the general in charge of the Army of Northern Virginia, his house gets taken over and turned into a cemetery, Arlington National Cemetery, which was the house of Robert E. Lee, Arlington House, and the great-granddaughter of George Washington, Mary Custis Lee. It was her house, but the General Meigs, Montgomery Meigs, was the quartermaster general of the United States, the federal forces, and he created a mass grave in front of Arlington House. So no matter what, Robert E. Lee, who he viewed as, and rightfully so, was a traitor, could never move back into that house. Compare it to George Washington, whether it was respect that some in the British military had or whatever the reason was. They didn't destroy or desecrate his land. And compare that to Robert E. Lee, who was a beloved general when he served in the United States Army, superintendent of West Point, and the response by the American people to him and his actions was, you'll never move back onto this land again. And we're turning it into the hallowed grounds and sacred grounds of Arlington National Cemetery.
That's a great, great piece of history. And maybe they were sending a lesson.
Yeah, well, that's why one of the reasons that we love living in Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area is there's so much history and so much to learn from. And, you know, one of the worst mistakes we can make is to lie about what really happened. In order to learn from the past, you have to tell the truth. And so, you know, and that's in anything, that the greater danger to others will be that others believe your lies. And we have to be honest. And I love the fact that we're now having conversations about the reality of the individuals that were revered during the Civil War, that based on a false narrative. So I think that it's one of the things that we have to tell the truth about. And I love General Petraeus wrote a great article in the Atlantic that brought to light the reality of the situation. Not to mention that some of these people were revering and naming military installations after lost. Why would you name something after someone that lost? I know this is controversial and we didn't need to get controversial, but I look at Washington and Lee and do that comparison and contrast positive influence on others versus negative influence on others.
It's definitely an interesting viewpoint because I was working on my master's degree in Civil War Studies at American Military University, and what you say is on point. And there are some other factors too with economics and tariffs and compromises and a lot of other things that led up westward expansion. My wife's a native Virginian. She grew up just south of Richmond, and General Lee had his headquarters not far from where her childhood home is. And you're right, General Lee is revered in those areas. Washington and Lee University, visited there, and VMI. I've got some great friends that have gone to VMI, and my take on it is that we do need to tell the truth and what really took place. It's a confusing issue for a lot of people because I think anytime that that we have a vote in America and we have referendums and we have the right to choose. And I think that the way it's gone about happening, I think people need to be educated that it needs to be put at a vote. But I think to unilaterally destroy, people that might say Washington did the things that he did, or even what I've heard about Christopher Columbus, how far do we go, sir? How far do we go with these passions running so high these days and destroying public property? And, I think there needs to be some semblance of law and order. Do the education, but let's take it to a vote. Or if it doesn't get that far, let's do the right thing that you talk about. Yeah. How do we get there?
Well, I think we start with not being callous to the suffering or not being callous or indifferent to the sufferings of others, whether it's sufferings or sufferings that they're going through. Separate that we have to be mature enough to be able to say, look, the looters are not the protesters. The message of the looters is not the protesters. What's the message of the protesters? I had issues that I went through on the battlefield of Iraq. I've seen valor on the battlefield, a series of noble acts over a period of time under harsh conditions. And we've seen valor here, whether it's in messaging or actions by individuals. Just recently, we can't be indifferent or callous to the sufferings of others, whether those are perceived or real. It's that power, like I said when we first started, the power of humiliation when you feel like you don't fit in can be overwhelming. No one in this country should feel like they don't fit in. And everyone gets a vote. So take advantage of it. I believe in strong national defense. I believe in limited government. I believe in individual rights. And I believe in free market economy. Not everyone believes what I believe, but we can have a conversation about it. And then come to create a consensus. At the end of the day, one of the most important things of an authentic leader is he or she is a consensus builder. And once you create that consensus, then you make positive things happen. You don't sit back and are that naysayer and pessimist that points at the half empty glass.
We've got to make more authentic leaders, whatever it takes. And I've been so encouraged by the veterans who are coming home and then assuming leadership roles in their community at the grassroots, doing something that's small but powerful for people.
Well, you get them started and they're going to be contributing members to their communities for years and years to come. And it didn't just start with this generation of veterans, by the way.
No.
It goes way back. It's all generations of
Yeah,
veterans.
it's tradition.
You know, we live on the warrior ethos. You know, for the Army, it's I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit, and I will never leave a fallen comrade. And that was built inside a culture, an organization, over years of blood, sweat, and tears, from the islands of the Pacific to the hedgerows of Europe to the frozen chosin of Korea to the rice paddies of Vietnam to the mountains of Central Asia and the deserts of Southwest Asia. We created this warrior ethos that everyone tries to live up to. I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. And I will never leave a fallen comrade. And that's the way we think. And that's what we bring back to our communities. They're amazing young people. And you know, we're successful on the battlefield, I'm convinced today, because of what we learned from our Vietnam veterans. And we're successful when we come home because we can talk about our challenges because they couldn't. And now everyone wants to assist, everyone wants to engage. And that's what you see with the Sea of Goodwill and why we created Dixon Center for Military and Veteran Services.
That's awesome. You know, one thing, I was going to ask you if you had a credo or a mantra that you live by, and you seem to list quite a few mantras, and I get that, and it's nice to see that in your story, because we all have to have a mantra. And I think that your mantra speaks volumes about the bravery and about the commitment and about, of the men and women of all colors and all races and religions who have made the country what it is. And I applaud your bravery in being able to voice that in a way that makes good sense and without the negativity. And it's, we hear the word fair and balanced. Well, it is. It's fair and balanced. Not only that, it's real and it's legitimate. And when we talk about legitimacy, it is the authenticity that we also badly search for. You definitely have got me thinking about a lot of things. And I'm sure the people listening and viewing this interview are thinking the same thing. I got one for you, sir. What does freedom mean to you?
Treating everyone with dignity and respect, because people will remember what you did, not what you said. And for me, that dignity and respect is allowing people the opportunity to achieve what their potential and their desire allows them to accomplish. Without dignity and respect, there is no freedom. I believe that people have the right to achieve their full potential, no matter what they think, the way they act, within the rules of law. And so treating everyone with dignity and respect is freedom. Not telling them how to think, not telling them what they should be or what they should do, allowing them, because of those two values of dignity and respect.
You know, it's amazing. Whenever we ask that question, we get a different answer. And every answer is valuable, you know, a valuable lesson in authentic leadership, what you just said. And I can tell you, having guys like you out there, you know, covering our sixes, you know, back here at home, I'm so very fortunate, and I'm glad you made it home. And I'm very proud of what you guys were able and gals were able to do there for my benefit. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And John, isn't dignity and respect where we got started? John and I were talking back in the day, and he said, Bill, have you ever read that book on etiquette? You know, that giant book on Amy Vanderbilt has one. And I thought to myself, you know what, David, I grew up in a family where dignity and respect were just part of the way things were. And I commend my father for that, for carrying that tradition forward. I commend my mother for that. I had the family around me to help me there. And what you've told me today, what I've heard you say, is that this family that supports dignity and respect is all around us right now. It's around us in the form of veterans. It's around the form of active duty. It's around us in the form of authentic leaders. And I just thank you for being a living example of that, and for sharing some of your wisdom with us today and inspiring other people who who will hear this. Who knows how far down the road this historical record will survive? Who'll go back and, you know, scratch the ancient surface of YouTube, and centuries from now, here's this guy, David Sutherland, talking about dignity and respect in 2020. What a crazy year that was.
Yeah, we're not summer soldiers, are we?
Oh,
Let me ask you this, sir. How can people find out more information about the Dixon Center and then your consulting services? And if they want to get a copy of the book, those three things, what do they need to do?
And so dixoncenter.org, DIXON center.org is the website for our work, because we believe our veterans and military families can succeed where they live, or should succeed where they live. And we also believe that every organization, every business, every nonprofit, every faith-based organization, every department and agency should include veterans in their programs, services, and opportunities. So our mission is to make that possible in every community across the country. That is dixoncenter.org. It's named after Staff Sergeant Donnie Dixon, not because who was killed on the 29th of September 2007. While he and I were on a patrol in the neighborhood of Balur, Iraq, and a sniper shot and killed Sergeant Dixon. Isn't named in memoriam of him. It's named in honor of everything he represented. Non-commissioned officer, second tour in Iraq, third enlistment, a father, a husband, that lived up to the values that we expect. And he represents so many others that served. So instead of just naming it the generic Center for Military and Veteran Services, we named it Dixon Center to capture all of those things that our great service members achieve every day. So find out if you're interested in finding and focusing on direct service programs for veterans and their families. Dixoncenter.org is the place to go. Sutherland Partnership on our website, sutherlandpartnership.com, is right on the top is how you can find the book Be Do. We're doing great. It's a firm made up of military veterans who are providing the consulting services on leadership development and corporate culture. for major organizations that are interested in making their organizations a great place to work, live, and play.
Awesome. There you have it, right from the Colonel's mouth. David Sutherland and Bill, my co-host. We've had a really nice and interesting time doing this so far, and just thank you for giving us your time today, Colonel, and we look forward to the future.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. From my heart, this has been a real inspiration for me to be able to be here and chat with you today. It's the kind of conversation that we need right now, in my opinion.
I agree. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you for joining us on this episode of AHO Radio. Information we mentioned is probably in the show notes, but if we missed anything, please let us know and we'll get it added for you. Subscribe to the AHO Radio channel on YouTube to stay connected, and as always, we wish you health, success, and significance. AHO!
AHO!